Says we're live, but let's see here. Still waiting for this to update on my end. Go ahead and pull up my stream here. Okay. All right, looks good. Okay, so today I want to cover a topic that I've talked about a few times, but I want to kind of walk through what I mean when I say building front end first, and also when I talk about trying to build each component of an app, each feature of an app separately from the main app. So whenever you're coding with AI or large language models like Gemini, ChatGPT, etc., it's easy to think that you can build the whole thing in one conversation. Usually you start a conversation thinking like, oh, I have an idea for an app. I know what it's going to do. I know what I want. And you start diving in and having a conversation. Pretty soon you realize like the ideas that Gemini and ChatGPT and Perplexity and all these other large language models, the ideas that they have about the product you want to make are often a lot different than the ideas that you had for the product that you want to make. So you get into this long conversation, and pretty soon it's way bigger and way different than you anticipated. Sometimes that is okay, and you just end up kind of rolling with it and building out something that you had like very little to do with. You just like ends up with a totally different product than you originally thought, and that's fine. I see a lot of that in Reddit. I'm pretty sure that that's what's happening because if you go to Reddit and you, like if we type in Vibecode, let's see here. Well, there's all kinds of things here, but let's do I Vibecoded. See what comes up. I Vibecoded a game in 32 hours. My experiment, blah, 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 blah. Usually what you'll find when you run across these threads is some kind of app where there's already like 100 of these that already exist. And I like this one. Let's see right here. And no offense if this is your website, but this looks so much like everything else that exists out there that's vibe coded. Asteroid Impact Simulator. It's like, okay, simple idea. Got like a nice UI, I guess. But I mean, how many people are going to use this? Maybe some people. I mean, maybe there's a huge interest in it. But I bet you, if we just Google Asteroid Impact Simulator, there's probably a bunch of these already that exist. Oh, let me zoom in here. It's probably small on your screen. Asteroid Impact Simulator. Simulate your own asteroid impacts. Earth impact. Like a large asteroid impact simulation. Let's just type in web app So hopefully it narrows down. Asteroid launcher, crater impact. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's already things like this that exist. And so somebody got this idea. Yeah, like all these pictures, they all do the same thing. Somebody got this idea in their head, like, oh, that would be cool. And then they built it. It already exists, first of all. And second, like, did they do any market research? Did they look to see, is there some target market that they're trying to hit? Probably not. And so you end up with this product that nobody wants, nobody needs, already exists, and it doesn't need to exist anymore. So that's one problem with vibe coding. But the other problem is, like, let's say you built this and then at some point you realize, oh, actually, nobody wants this. It's not that unique. Maybe I can add some features to make it more unique and make it stand out. Or maybe you have a good premise and you want to build something on that and add more to it. So what you usually end up doing is you go to your conversation, your existing conversation, and you just add in a prompt like, add a feature that does X, whatever it is. And what happens is you start getting into this long, like, back and forth with where the language model creates code that ends up having errors, or it ends up forgetting features that you had that you wanted. And it takes forever every single time because it's rebuilding the entire application, sometimes changing the look and feel of the app in the meantime, changing the name of it, and like all kinds of things that didn't need to happen. So there is a simple solution to this, and that is anytime you're going to work on any app idea, what you should do is work on the simplest possible version of it and then build from there. So, for example, like all these apps that I've built on my website, all of them started out with a simple idea. And sometimes it took me a long time to get to that simple idea because just like everyone else, I go on to ChatGPT or Gemini or wherever, and I start typing and trying to figure out how to build this thing. And I find out like it's more complicated than I realized, or I had some assumptions about it that I didn't realize. And so I have to like continually go back to the drawing board and restart and with a better assumption than I started with in the first place. And so even though all of these are very simple applications, generally it took quite a bit of iteration for each of these to get to something that I was happy with. And these are just apps that I was building for myself. So if I were building these for a target market, it would be that much more difficult to find the real truth in the premise of like what I thought I was building. And I've talked about using Notebook LM and Reddit for doing market research to figure out what type of web app you should build or what type of application you should build. So I won't go into that in this live stream. You can go watch my previous live streams if you're interested. But once you have that idea, it still takes a lot of iteration and testing, and that can get really cumbersome when you're having these long conversations with Gemini or ChatGPT or Perplexity, where it's writing out the entire code base every time. And like, for example, here's just a pretty simple app that I built, or well, Gemini built this, and all this code would get output every time I do any edits on it. And so it ends up taking a long time, and like I said, there's all these problems with like new errors pop up. It gets confused about what I'm trying to build. And so what I recommend is that once you figure out like something that you want to build, once you get an idea, build out just one simple feature at a time and use CodePen like I have here. I'll open up a new one so I can show you what I mean, but use CodePen and test out that one feature. And once you have a few features, then you can piece them all together, like put them all into one conversation with Gemini or Perplexity or ChatGPT, and then go from there. But often you're going to find that the premise that you started with, the idea that you started with, was not actually that good of an idea or that clear of an idea or that like accurate. You're often going to find that it takes a while to narrow down what it is that you're really trying to do. So let's say that I want to add a feature to this application here. Now I've already got a working application. It's live online. It's at noisefixer.com, by the way, if you want to test this out. It's a 3D spectral frequency display for audio, where you can edit or change this noise floor and reduce noise in the audio. So that's the tool. And there's a couple other features here. There's processing in high quality, and then there's a pop and click remover for old vinyl records. But let's say I want to add another feature to this. Let me think here. Let's see. Let's say I want to add an equalizer to this. Well, rather than taking all of this code, like, let me copy all this and dumping this in here, add an equalizer. And dumping all this code. This might work, but rather than doing that, what I can do instead that is much better is just start a new conversation about just that equalizer that I want to build based on this code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, actually, I'll take a prompt that I already have over here. So this is just a prompt to get Gemini to understand what it's looking at. So I'm going to tell it, list every element, function, variable, and constant. These are, that's a CSS and HTML word, but function, variable, and constant, these are all JavaScript terms. And add a very short description for each about what it does and how. And then I pasted all my code. So now this is just adding context to the conversation. And I'll use the fast model. Once I'm coding, I should probably use the thinking model, but for this step, it should be okay to use the fast model. And yeah, all this is doing is just giving Gemini the context for the conversation that I want to have about the new feature. But I'm still not going to have it add that feature to this code yet. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'll say, okay, based on that working web app, build a completely new web app that just has a let's call it an EQ curve with multiple points, like the mastering curve in Adobe Audition. So this is just the thing I want to build. So I'm just doing one feature, but I'm basing it off of that entire code base. So let's try using the fast model and see if it works. We may or may not. So again, I'm not adding that feature to this app. I'm just having it build a new app that only has that feature. I will create a single file web application that simulates a multi-band EQ mastering curve, but I don't want it to simulate. This is a problem that you often run into. And again, if I were just adding that to my existing code base, then I would have to wait for it to build the entire thing and then tell it I don't want it to simulate. I want to work with actual files. But in this case, it's already built it out that quickly. Now, it doesn't work, and that's exactly the problem. Again, if this were adding this code to my web app, it would take forever to write out all that code, and then it wouldn't work anyway. So let's go ahead and pull in a piece of audio and just see what happens here. And yeah, sure enough, it's not updating the code or updating the view. So I'm going to tell it right now, the tool doesn't work. I don't want it to simulate. I want it to actually work with real audio. And this time, let's use the Thinking with Pro model. And it'll take a little bit longer than the fast model, but it'll still be way faster than writing out this entire app with that one new feature. Now, one thing that you notice is this looks very similar in design to this web app. And that's important because when we go to reintegrate it, that's just a nice feature that it's already building off of the design that we had. And that's because of that context that I added earlier in the conversation when I dumped the entire code base. Even though it's building a completely new web app, we gave it that context to start with. And so it already has a look and feel. And hopefully the backend will integrate. I mean, I say backend, I'm using that term a bit loosely, but hopefully the actual JavaScript is going to integrate well as well. I would assume so because it's taking cues from all of the context, and I can visually see that it's taking cues from the context that I gave it. So that's just kind of a nice feature of adding your entire code base. Now, you don't have to do that. You could just start from scratch and build out that one feature and then try to reintegrate it later, and it'll probably work, but this just gives you a head start in integrating. So let's check these curves, and sure enough, they're not working still. So let's go ahead and load an audio file just to double check here. Okay, interesting. All right, so it's working. Let's see here. It's kind of working. Well, unfortunately it's these. The green line is only updating when we play the audio, so it's just not quite working how we want it to visually. And I'm not sure what this bandwidth is adjusting. let's see here. Oh, I see. Okay. So we need, in order for this to work well, we need that green line to update visually, even though the audio is not playing. So let's just go ahead and tell Gemini that. The green line needs to update in real time, even though the audio, even when the audio isn't playing. Audio isn't playing. And again, this type of iteration would take a lot longer if we were actually integrating this into the giant code base that is this app that I've already built. And that would be the case whether we were using Bolt or Lovable or Google's anti-gravity or any of those with access to a backend. In fact, even more so with a backend, because when you have a backend, when you have a language model that's connected to a backend, it's always going to try to build out like as much of the feature set as it thinks needs to exist, and a lot of times it ends up building out more of a backend. Like it adds more files to your code base than you need and doesn't end up using the existing code base, and like it gets distracted and like forgets that stuff already exists, and so you end up with this huge code base that you don't need, that isn't really representative of the app that you're trying to build. So it's much better. Here we go. Same thing. Same issue. The green line should update and follow the handles, but it only does it when the audio is uploaded. Let's go ahead and upload the audio and just make sure that it isn't working. Yeah, it's only working when you play the audio. And playing. Now, I mentioned this before, but when you're talking with a language model, it's good to remember that the way a language model works is it's essentially basing its response off of your prompt as if it's trying to sort of like finish the sentence or finish whatever it is that it thinks follows what you're saying. So the more context you give it, the better. But also, when you're writing a prompt, sometimes just saying what is happening without telling it whether that's good or bad, you're essentially just adding like information that isn't really helpful context. If you say, the code is doing such and such and you don't like that, you should say, I don't like that, or it's not good, or that shouldn't happen. What should happen instead is Y, or what, X is happening. What should happen instead is Y. So here, let's do that right now. What should happen is the green line should always follow the handles in real time, even if no audio is uploaded. So the user knows their update was registered. Logged. And speaking of logged, I'm going to go grab one of my prompts here, which is add logging to diagnose. I always like to add logging because a lot of times, and by the way, that's called console logging. Let me just type that in there. A lot of times when you add console logging, it'll fix any errors that were there, even though you didn't, even if you didn't tell it how to fix the error. Sometimes just adding console logging, it'll fix it itself. There's something about adding console logging that seems to make the language model more cognizant of what could cause errors. But even if it doesn't fix it by telling it to add logging, once you output the code and run it, that console logging will help in giving the language model some more information about what's happening and like where the issue is. So it's a good idea to always add logging, whether you're writing the code yourself or having a language model do it for you. So another thing that I want to try at some point, and this is a little bit more in depth, but with this application in particular, what I'd like to do is kind of separate out some of these features as if they are apps within this larger web app. And so that way it would make it a lot easier to add new features. If I just sort of modularize them and build this in such a way that it kind of acts like an API where new modules could be added at any time. That's something that I also recommend when you're building out a web app that you anticipate will probably have a lot more features than like just one or a couple features. It's a good idea to try to build it modular in a way where you could add new modules at any time, and it won't you won't have to rebuild the entire app. So I wish I had already built that out this way to begin with, because it's going to take a little bit of adjusting the code. But when we go to integrate this feature here, I'll see if it's possible to do that, to rebuild this a little bit so that it's a little bit more modular. So each of these are like modules that can be turned on and off, or even added and removed from this stack here, so that each user can adjust which features they want to have visible for them. So I think that would be a great test to see if that's possible once this is already built. But also it's something that I already wanted anyway, so we can try doing that next. Okay, let's see if it did a good job here. Hey, there we go. That's exactly what we wanted to see. Let's go ahead and load the audio, just double check that it works. And play. Seems like it does. All right. Okay, cool. So we've got a whole new feature here that we could integrate into our app. Now, how do we do that? How are we going to reintegrate a new feature into this app? Well, this is an important part of how to think about coding like this. When you've already built out a web app and you want to add a new feature, each time you want to add a new feature, it's going to change something about the app that you already have. Like, if nothing else, you've got to fit it somewhere on the page. But on top of that, you've got to think about how, like, which options you want people to have in their view at any one time. Which options you want to have at the top of the screen or next to other things. There's this concept called visual hierarchy, which, let me pull up a picture here. So whenever you're thinking about design, you should be thinking about visual hierarchy. What things are most visible to the user at any one point in time? Which things should be most visible? Which thing, like, brightest? Like, here's a good example. Here are 3 different screens, all using the same colors, but with much different emphasis on different parts of the screen. So here on the left, you've got the whole screen is bright yellow, and there's 2 buttons here with a little bit of text at the top. So this is a nice visual first intro to an app. And then you've got mostly white here with a lot of text and a player here that's bright yellow, a little bit of yellow there in the picture, a little bit of yellow there. So each of the colors, I mean, here you've just got 3 colors, or yeah, mostly. There's also this background color here, but for the most part, you've got 3 colors that you're working with. And there's quite a bit of adaptability you have in visual hierarchy. Again, over here on the right-hand side, you've got this bright yellow box highlighting the search field. So there's lots of different ways to think about visual hierarchy. Here's a better example where this text right here has no hierarchy other than the bright red box right here. But the text below it, okay, so on this left-hand side, all the text is the same size and font and like heaviness, weight. And over here, you've got big text here and then smaller text here, and it keeps getting smaller. So right away, you see which text is most important. So when you're thinking about building out an application, you've got to think about that. And also, like, utility, how useful it's going to be when it looks a certain way. On my application here, this noise fixer, I've made the default color for the noise filter bright red so that it's visually obvious that something is happening there. I've made this pink color, I've echoed it here, the green color, echoed it here, so you know there's some correlation there between what these sliders do and this spectral display over here. But some of this other stuff gets a little bit buried. And like having green here probably isn't a good color for this effect right here because it is the same color as this green down here or pretty similar. And, you know, a user could get confused. Why this is green and this is green and this is green? Do those have something to do with each other? And in fact, they do not. But also green means something often. You know, green means go, green is good often, red is bad often, or stop or warning. So each of those colors and like how they're used in an application will need to inform your decisions as you're going about trying to build out your web app or application. So going back to this new effect that I want to add, I've got to think about that. For one thing, we've got a problem here. Looks like it worked for a while, but now if I play it and then pause it, it looks like this green line isn't updating, so we'll have to fix that. But anyway, when I go to integrate this, I've got to think about that. One, you know, think about all the colors here. Is it going to interfere with the color scheme that I already have going on and the visual language that I'm using to communicate with the user? And two, is it going to look good as part of this application, or is it going to stand out and look strange? Generally, your language model will sort of try to fit things in a way that makes sense, but it's still something that you should be thinking about as you're building. So before we think about that, though, let's update this and let Gemini know that the problem that we're running into, which is that when the audio is paused, updating the handles does not update the green line, and that's bad. Even when the audio is paused, the green line should always follow the handles in real time. And then I'm going to go back and add this same note here to add console logging, just in case that might help the language model. Like, I don't know, it just seems, for some reason, it seems to do a better job when you tell it to add console logging. So at some point, I'm going to try to integrate this in here, and I want to think about how to do that. And I mentioned earlier, I want to try to modularize these tools, make them to where they can be like turned on and off, or added to this stack of effects that you have, that you're like, that's affecting the audio. But I've got to think about, you know, there may already be some integrations here between some of these effects that I don't want to mess that up by modularizing it. So, like, for example, this preview mode takes all the effects that are in place and tries to preview what those effects will do to the audio in the visual spectrum here. So if I add or remove effects, I need it to still pass through that preview mode. So preview mode needs to be the last thing that happens after all the effects are applied and before we process the audio. So that's something that I need to think about. Output noise only, that needs to happen before preview mode, but after all these other effects. So that's why these two sliders are down here at the bottom, right below, or right above the process audio button. But when I'm communicating with Gemini about it, that might be something that I need to note in particular, that these two need to happen at the toward the end of the process, so after all the effects are applied. High quality processing probably needs to be here at the top so that it impacts all of the other effects. But again, I might need to communicate that to Gemini. Let's go back and see where we're at with this. Still writing the code. Now, it's taken quite a while to write this code, and it would take way longer if it were writing the code on top of all this other code. So that's again so necessary to just do one filter at a time, or one feature at a time. So I want to think about how to visually represent these as modules instead of the way they are now. They're all kind of one thing. So this kind of already looks like a module. You know, it's in its own little box here. But these, all three of these sections, these all need to be considered in one section, one module. So I'm thinking about that visually, like how I would represent that. Maybe I'd separate these with a line going across here, maybe a dotted line. I also want to think about how to add or remove effects. Should there be a panel somewhere where I can turn them on or off? Should I just hide them behind little drop downs? That's all something that I need to think about. And often you can get ideas by just going to Google and typing in like like you have to think of words to use to communicate to Google what it is that you're trying to do. But in my case, let's see here, modules, let's see, UI of module, how do I want to say this? Modular, maybe modular UI? But I also want it to be a sidebar. Modular UI sidebar. Let's see what happens here. And we might even try adding like audio effects sidebar or something. Let's go ahead and do that. Audio effects. And I always forget is it effects or FX? I think it's FX. Let's see here. None of these look quite like what I'm looking for. Maybe if we could do sort of like collapsible, drag and drop. So just using a few different words to try to find something that looks like what it is that you're trying to build, or get ideas for how you want it to look. And it doesn't have to be in the same category of application. You could steal ideas from anywhere, but you got to have some way of communicating to the language model what it is that you want to build, because it doesn't know. Having given it any information, it'll kind of guess that it needs to look a certain way. But generally, it's good to have some idea of what it is that you're trying to do. So this is giving me an idea of that these could be, the effects could be icons maybe. This kind of has, we could do it sort of like this where it's a menu, but it's got drop downs. Let's take out audio and audio effects here. Collapsible, drag and drop. And of course I misspelled collapsible, sorry. Yeah, I'm not really seeing anything that looks like how I want it to look. Maybe just instead of collapsible, drag and drop modular tools. Yeah, I'm not seeing exactly what I want, but I'm getting some words that I can use to communicate with Gemini. As I do this research, I'm thinking about it and coming up with words like modular, collapsible. These are all ways of communicating to Gemini what it is that I'm trying to build and how I want it to think about this. Here we go. I think this is getting closer. So, dashboard. Okay. I know that I've seen dashboards like widgets. Okay, here we go. Widgets. I think widget is a good word. So let's go sidebar widgets. Widget tools, drag and drop. Okay, I'm not seeing exactly what I want, but that's okay. I now have a good word to use when I talk with ChatGPT about, or Gemini about this. All right, first of all, let's go ahead and test this, add our audio file. And play, and then pause and make sure, okay, still works. All right, and just double check that these work as well, even when it's paused. That one doesn't seem to do anything. I wonder. Yeah, I wonder if these band 5. Yeah, okay. So let's tell it the band 1 and band 5 bandwidth sliders don't seem to do anything visually. That's confusing. They either should do something or not be there. And I don't know what they should do, so I don't know what Gemini is thinking that they are there for, but having some tools or some fields or sliders that don't actually do anything, at least visually, is going to be confusing to the user. So it needs to do a better job of either making them do something or removing them. I'm letting it decide which of those, because I'm not really sure. I will remove the queue bandwidth sliders for band 1 and band 5. Since these are shelf sliders, the queue factor affects the slope resonance rather than the clear width, which can be confusing visually if the gain is low. Well, I don't know if that is right, but I think they should work. So I think I'm going to change my mind and tell it that the angle, because the angle here should change. I think that's what those sliders should do. So I'm not sure how I want to say that, because I think that's like a sine curve or something. I should have studied more in my math or geometry, but yeah, okay. I think the band 1 and band 5 bandwidth sliders should exist, but they should make the curve steeper or less steep. I don't know if steeper or less steep is the right word. Make the curve more curvy. I don't know. Yes, make the curve more curvy, please. Good times. All right. So anyway, I think what I'm going to do, rather than have this conversation, well, let me think here. Maybe I'll try 2 different attempts. When I integrate this tool here with this tool, I could try to dump all of this code back into this conversation and have it integrate this tool that we've been working on into this tool. But there's an operation that I need to do first, which is I need to get that modularization, or the widgetification, turning these tools into widgets. I need to do that first, so that when we add this tool, it already understands that concept and imports this as a separate widget. Let's see here. That didn't work. The curve needs to get more curvy. Maybe like AKA a tighter turn curve. I'm sure there's a word for this. In fact, let me just go. What's it called when a curve, I guess is probably radius, is tighter or less? I think it's probably radius of a curve. Sharp has a lower curvature. Okay, tighter curve, higher curvature, hairpin, switchback. Radius? I think I'm just going to use radius. Radius. For band 1 and 5 when I adjust the bandwidth sliders for those two, just like happens with the others. Yeah, we'll see. Make the curves more curvy. All right, so what I was talking about. I'm going to I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this and start a new conversation and work on the modularization part of the process. This brings up a very important point when it comes to building things with, well, whether you're using AI or not, this is an important part of building. And that is order of operations. Whenever you're building something, you got to think about which thing needs to be done first. Because if we add this code to our existing code base and then we try to modularize it, it could end up causing more problems than we really need to. If we make this modular first and then we add the new module, that's going to work a lot better than trying to add a feature and then modularize it. So what I should have done is before I built this entire app out, I should have built it all to be modular from the beginning. But that's just something that you learn as you're going. You never know for sure what you're building. I've said that over and over. Like, it takes getting into something and working on it before you realize what it is that you're really building and how to do it. So even though I've got this thing working and I like it, now that I want to update it, it's problematic because I didn't build it right the first time. And that's okay, but that just means that it's more work now to go back and fix it. So always be thinking about that. Like, try to think ahead as much as you can and think, okay, how am I going to want this to look in the future? What am I going to want to add to this? What other features might be useful in the future? What other audience might use this? Like, always be trying to think in the future, because had I done that, early on in building this tool, then I would already have it set up as modules and we wouldn't have to be doing that now. And I could just add a new module. It'd be a lot easier. And it would be easier to communicate with Gemini about a new feature. I could just talk about it with that module or widget terminology. But if I did that now, it wouldn't really make sense. So let's go ahead and tackle this problem. We're going to start a new conversation exactly like I did before, which is just have it create the context. And we'll use the fast model. Make sure I've copied everything. And again, I just have it list every element, function, variable, and constant, and a very short description for each about what it does and how. And that will give the context that we need for updating it. Let's go back to this tool and see if our curve is more curvy. Let's go down here. And I think that's band 1. It's still not working. I wonder why that is. And I don't know how to... Let's go ahead and copy. I don't want to copy all that. Let's just copy this console. And this is what I was talking about earlier, the console logging. Why is the green line not getting more or less curvy Let's see if we can figure out how it's thinking about this problem by reading what it's saying here. I'm now zeroing in on the EQ visualization isn't reflecting the Q bandwidth slider changes. Okay. I've been thinking about the Q factor's impact. Yeah, debugging the shelf. I think that's a word we might need to use, shelf. The problem isn't with Q itself, but gain dependency. I was focused on Q being ignored for shelf filters. Won't be visible if the gain is 0 dB, which is standard. Well, if we change, maybe that's something we could test, is changing the output gain and see if, the user expects a steeper slope, changes the knee. The knee, that's the word. Changes the knee, not the slope itself, but it doesn't change the knee. It should be making that knee off. The gain is 0 dB. Interesting. And you load the app, there's already, well, we don't want to do that. It says, I've updated the code to initialize band 1 and band 5 with a default gain of 6 dB. We don't want that. We don't want it to be, yeah, that's not the right solution. Yeah. So let's correct that. No, that's not the right solution. What I was talking about was the knee itself. Even when I set the gain of the shelf to something other than 0, adjusting the bandwidth for band 1 and 5 does not change the knee, I don't know, knee curve, but it should. All right, let's see if that works. And this is already done here. So let's try to get, now this is going to take a little bit of thinking, but I want, okay, noise removal settings. I think I want left channel, well, okay. Do I want to make each of the modules affect only the left channel or the right channel? Or do I want this left channel / right channel to only impact these sliders? No, I think I do. I think I want this to be a module right here. Vinyl cleanup. Let's see. Boy, this gets weird. Because this file right here, or this vinyl restoration feature only works by combining both the left and right channel. So it doesn't really make sense in the context of the rest of this left and right channel functionality. Once this is turned on, this is actually kind of a moot point. Like it doesn't, I think it wouldn't have a left and right channel, or let's see, maybe this needs to be below this. Yeah, I need to do some thinking about this. I think this is something that I'm going to have to come back to because it's a much larger issue than I was realizing. I don't know if I'll make this a entirely like a separate live stream, but this is kind of a big topic, and it's sort of the reason why I was talking about it all in the first place, is that it's kind of a big deal when you want to add a feature into an existing application. So instead of doing it exactly how I want to, which is going to take some time, I'll just give you a quick example of how we would add this to this existing tool. So what I really want to do is I want to build this out into modules. But instead of doing that right now, just for the sake of making this live stream not take up your entire night, I will just add this one feature that we've been building. At some point, I'm going to come back and make this into modules, but I need to think about it a little bit more, because I need to think about how I want to break up these modules and which ones need to be first and which ones, like in what order they need to be. That's something that like I said, I wish I had thought through before, but what do you do? All right, is this done? It's still writing code, I guess. I've updated let's see, the key issue with band 1, low shelf, and band 5, unresponsiveness was likely, well, I don't know. Nope, it still didn't fix it. Is it done writing code? You did not actually fix anything. The knees. How do we, let's see. What are the first and last knees called in a multi-band equalizer curve? In a multi-band equalizer, the knees at the extreme ends of the frequency spectrum are technically known as cutoff frequencies or corner frequencies. The filters creating these curves are typically referred to as high-pass filters for the first. Okay, yeah. The term knee is more commonly used in the context of a compressor's threshold, where it describes the transition between the uncompressed and compressed. Okay. See, this is something that I've mentioned before as well in other live streams. You end up learning way more than you really want to, because just trying to communicate with the language model, you're always having to like go look stuff up and figure out why, or let's see, when should that knee transition be a tight curve versus a less tight curve. Let's see what it says. And then I might just take this. The tightness of the equalizer's curve transition should be chosen based on the desired sonic result, whether you're making the surgical corrective changes or broad musical tonal. Okay, yes, but I'm talking about the needs for the high pass and low pass filters. The high pass and low pass filters at the ends of the multi-band EQ. Let's see what it says here. For high pass and low cut and low pass filters at the ends of the EQ chain, the tightness refers to the filter slope, not typically the Q factor. The choice between a steep slope, a tight curve, and a gentle slope depends entirely on whether you prioritize transparency versus aggressive frequency removal. A gentle slope, introduce less phase distortion and a smoother transition. Tight. So maybe this is just how that needs to be, and I don't think so, but for now, let's go ahead and leave it, and we're going to just take this tool as is and implement it as a feature in this tool. So let's copy all this code here, and we'll just tell Gemini here in this conversation where it just did basically an inventory of all the code for this tool. Let's add this feature to the tool in this conversation. So we'll say, add this multi-band EQ to the tool, to the web app, just where it makes the most sense in the processing chain. And I'm going to say, I'm going to grab some of my prompts here, which I'll read those out in just a second. Okay, I just pasted all the code. Please write the full, complete, and working HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code in a code box for the complete web application with the following characteristics. The code must be fully complete and functional with no placeholders or comments. Include detailed console logs before, during, and after every step to provide a comprehensive diagnostic. I'm going to leave that off for now because we're outputting so much code, and just see if it can do it. If it can't do it, then at that point, maybe we'll add console logging. That's something you can always add later. But just in this case, because we're already outputting so much code, this is, it may have trouble even writing this much code. But we'll try it and see if it does it. One thing that you can do, and I've mentioned this in other live streams, but you can take all this JavaScript and take it to a JavaScript minifier. JavaScript minifier. And it'll shrink that JavaScript down and make it a little bit more condensed and compact. So that's a way that you can get more code in a smaller prompt. You can also do that with CSS. So you could minify all this CSS. It doesn't work so well with HTML, but with all this JavaScript, you could probably get it to be much smaller code. And in fact, let me just try that just so I can show you. Grab all this code here. And I'm going to take that to a tool on my website here. This one here. And just do a character count. 68,000 characters. And let's minify it and see. Yeah, I compressed it by 24%, but let's see what that looks like in terms of characters. Yeah, 51,000. So quite a bit smaller, and should work just the same. I haven't ever run into trouble with that. Theoretically, it may impact certain code, but I haven't run into any trouble with it. So that's a way to save some time when you're having a conversation with ChatGPT and you've got a giant code base. You may just try minifying it and see if that works. So I don't think it wrote out all the code here, but let's go ahead and test this out and see what it did do. And yeah, sure enough, it didn't actually write all the code. So what I'll do is I'll copy all this and I'll say, no, you didn't understand. I want you to integrate that multi-band EQ into the below web app as an additional filter. And now I'm going to say add logging. Along with all the other things. And I could also use Canvas here. Let's see if that helps. Sometimes having it output it in the Canvas can be it does a better job. And sometimes I've run into trouble where it just doesn't work as well for some reason, especially like if I'm working on a smaller piece of code that I'm trying to add to something else. Generally, if you do it within a console, or sorry, within a Canvas, it's going to try to make it a complete web app. And so I would say it's not really a problem in this situation, because that is what we want. We do want a complete web app. All right, so that's going to take some time to write all that code, and that's if it even is able to do it. It may be the case that I just need to focus on modularizing this first, and then if I can do that right, then I might be able to actually just dump pieces of code in instead of having it be fully integrated into this application. So we'll see if I get there. It'll take some time, and take some iterating. And again, the real way to do it would be to have made this the right way in the first place. But you learn as you're going, and I'm still learning at this AI coding thing. And yeah, this is going to take a long time. Working on integrating it. But you can always go in here and read these, read the way that it's thinking about it. And sometimes you can catch issues before it's even done writing the code. You can see like, oh, it's thinking about this the wrong way. It's not doing exactly what I was meaning. And sometimes you can get an idea of how to talk with the AI, like we did earlier, seeing the word knee. And in this conversation here, like looking at the way that it's thinking about it, we might get some more terminology about how to, shelf filters, queue parameters, curve steepness. See, each of these are terms that we can use when we're talking with the language model that it'll understand, because obviously it's using that terminology. You're kind of learning its language as you're reading this. Let's see here. I will generate a complete web application. And I don't know, it's kind of just a big black box, literally. HTML UI integration, adding a multiband EQ section to the sidebar. Yes, well that's good that it knew that it needs to go in the sidebar. Including a frequency response canvas and Q factor sliders. Audio engine integration. Rewrote the playback logic to use audio buffer source node instead of HTML5 audio elements. This allows the audio signal to pass through the web audio API filter chain before reaching the destination. Interesting. Signal chain. Okay, this is another thing that's helpful for us. As I'm thinking about how to redesign this, the way that it sees it is source, then multiband EQ, then master gain, then analyzer, then destination. But we have other things in there too, so I might need to do a little bit of work communicating with this, that it needs to have more than just that multiband EQ. So this is going to take a while, and it's going to take quite a bit of iteration to get this right. But that's basically the workflow. You share your code, you let it know that the feature that you want to add, and then you go back and you add that feature to your code again. Well, let's see what I output here. Okay, here we go. It looks like it kind of did it. Not exactly how I want it to look, but let's see here. Loading file. And yeah, it's not actually working, but it gives us an idea of how it was thinking about this challenge. And well, I got a phone call coming in, and I'm gonna work on this for quite a while. So hopefully by next live stream I'll have something to show you about how I solved this riddle. But I think what we're gonna have to do is go back to the drawing board with this tool and modularize it first, and then add this feature in here, which I highly recommend anytime you're building an application. Is think about it in terms of like a modular set of tools rather than one, because at some point you're going to want to add more features, and it's going to be problematic like it is right now for me. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next live stream, which again, I don't schedule these out, but